So, how many people do you know who've led in at least 8 different industries, helped grow one company from 12 million to nearly a billion with a B, and later helped guide a $1.5 billion acquisition? Me? None, until I met Scott W. Klein. He's my guest today. So I'm going to bring him up and let him tell you about himself. So, Scott, in a sentence, how would you describe yourself to someone meeting you for the first time?
Well, Tanya, one sentence makes it really hard. But if I met somebody on an elevator and they said, tell me about yourself, I would say I've spent most of my career as a transformational CEO, helping companies to grow their revenue, improve their profitability, and doing so by making sure that they have a culture that's fully aligned so that everybody knows what they need to do in order to accomplish the main mission.
Wow. Now, culture is such a word, almost becomes a buzzword. When you say culture aligned, tell me a little bit about what that looks like to you.
So what I often find when I go into a company is you have many people doing all sorts of activities. And what I generally see is many of those activities add absolutely no value to what it is the company needs to accomplish. So by making sure that everybody knows exactly what it is the team is trying to do, what it is that they want to accomplish to be successful, once they understand what those items are, they need to be able to draw a straight line from those objectives to what they personally do. And very often I'll ask people, if there are things you're doing that don't have anything to do with these specific objectives, please raise your hand. We'll eliminate those tasks and get you focused on things that will help get to the end state that we want to get to.
When you think about, this is the rabbit hole I told you about, by the way, Scott, whenever, when you think about busy work, because I think before I retired my corporate career, was one of the things that drove me the most crazy was some of the busy work that really was not helping, was an obstacle. So if you think back, don't have to name any companies. What were some examples of busy work that weren't necessarily aligned with the objectives?
My favorite one was I had taken over as CEO of a company, and a few weeks after I started, one of the members of the team came into my office with this big blue book. And she said, Scott, this is the big blue book. I wanted to make sure you got your copy of it. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, your predecessor had me go through all of the credits that we issued every month and catalog them in this big blue book. Okay. And I said, well, that's interesting. What happened with that information? And she then pointed to this bookshelf in the office that I had inherited. And there were all the blue books going back for years. And she says, they go on the bookshelf. And I said, well, that was it? And she said, no, absolutely nothing happened after that. And immediately I had this treasure trove of information that told me where we were making mistakes. Because when you're issuing a credit to a client, it's because something didn't go right. We did something wrong. We didn't price it right. We didn't describe it correctly. We sent them something they didn't want, whatever it was. And from that, we were able to find those mistakes, squeeze out the errors, and save millions and millions of dollars just from that book that used to be busy work and suddenly became incredibly valuable.
Wow. And shelves of them, you said?
Shelves.
That's a lot.
Yes, as a matter of fact, my predecessor at that company never met a piece of furniture that he wasn't in love with, because you had to squeeze your way through that office to get to the desk, because he just had bookcases and tables, and it was just an absolute disaster.
Wow. That's a pretty good example. Now, your career has moved, we already mentioned this, right, a little bit, across industries, geographies, startups, turnarounds, and acquisitions. What has been the common thread through all of it?
Well, over the years, I developed a methodology that I call real-time transformation. Okay. And using that methodology, it allows me to walk into a situation that I'm not familiar with and very quickly cut to the heart of what the key issues are that need to be addressed so that we can then start getting them addressed. As you mentioned, finding those activities that add no value, getting people to identify those and stopping them quickly, because stopping those non-value added activities quickly allows you to take the money being wasted and invest it into things that need to be done or help bring it back to the bottom line. Tanya, one of the stories that I love to tell is when I was in fourth grade, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Niebel, realized that I had a skill set. She could give me a stack of colored construction paper, 8.5 by 11 pieces of colored paper, and a pair of scissors. And without a ruler, without a pencil, I could easily cut out perfect block letters that she could use on a bulletin board. And she used to lend me out to all the other teachers, whether it was spring, summer. I always promoted fall. It was quicker than doing autumn. And one day she asked me, how do I do that? And my answer was, well, I take this piece of paper, and if I want to make the letter M, I cut away everything that doesn't look like an M. And I remember she wrote that down. And at a number of touch points throughout my life in elementary school and high school and college, she kept coming back to that and asking me what that meant. And finally, when I was about to graduate college, I realized that was how I looked at everything, what it was that I saw it should be, and cutting away everything else that wasn't needed. Yeah. And that is one of those developmental moments that helped me develop what real-time transformation is all about.
That removing the noise, that's kind of what I hear in that, right? Because people get so sucked up in the noise. I know I mentioned a moment ago in my corporate life, they would get so focused in, Scott, on, let's say, a particular key performance indicator, right? Because they want to drive more sales. So they wanted more sales. So they're focused on how many tasks somebody's logged. Okay, well, is the goal sales? Because, right? I mean, they just got so focused on what I would call symptoms rather than the actual outcome and reverse dialing it. You clearly have a strategic mind. When you think about the noisy stuff and maybe the thing that was missing, that was kind of a dotted line. What comes to mind for you?
Well, when you bring up that subject, and by the way, we could spend an entire hour talking about sales strategy and sales process and what it is that you really need to do in order to be successful. Because what I've seen as I've gone into these turnaround situations is that most salespeople spend 80% of their time doing non-sales activities. And one of the things I've always focused on is how can we strip away those non-sales activities from salespeople so that the only thing they're being accountable for is not activities like you talked about,
right,
but actual sales, profitable revenue being generated. And that is absolutely critically important because, as I always say, nothing happens in a company until something gets sold.
And for those watching, where this is a real challenge, Scott, for people who've been CEOs even for a long time, right? If they don't have a sales background, they also tend to really try to dial in on the wrong numbers. What are some of the things, when you think back to having sales teams, were the things you would strip away as an example?
Sure. So, very often you'll have a situation where a salesperson goes out and sells a new account, and they have to get a contract signed. Well, what I've often found in a new situation is companies have contracts that are 30, 40, 50, 80 pages long. And what I've always challenged attorneys to do is boil that down to a single page. Because generally speaking, you almost never go back to a contract. Right. If you have a healthy business relationship, if you're doing what it is you're supposed to do, the client's doing what they're supposed to do, you'll never go back. As a matter of fact, when I think back over my over 40 years of experience, I can only think of 2 times that I ever went back to a contract. And typically the attorneys will say something like, well, Scott, we can't go from 80 pages to 1, but maybe we could do 2. Okay, I'll take 2. Now, all of a sudden, the conversation with the client is totally changed because they've got a simple, easy to understand 2-page contract and they can get it signed. It's not a lot of back and forth because typically all that back and forth negotiating a contract adds no value.
Right.
And then after that, when the client needs to be set up technically in a system, there's usually work to be done to set up a client. You don't want salespeople doing that, but you'd be shocked in how many cases I found that the salesperson was responsible for that administrative task as well. And when you strip away the 80% of their time being spent on non-sales activities, and you get close to 100% focused on sales activities, sales can literally go vertical almost overnight. And the sales force will love you because you're taking away all the stuff they hate to do. They didn't become salesmen to do administrative work. They became salespeople to sell products, goods, services, whatever it is, so that they can make more money.
And it's two different parts of the brain that engages. If all of a sudden they're having to do all this administrative work and they've got a call in 15 minutes, it's hard to make that shift. With the change in contracts, how do you think that had an impact long term? I mean, I'm thinking as a consumer, if you're sending me 40 pages or you're sending me 1 or 2 pages, that's a really different onboarding process.
Absolutely, because what happens is the longer the contract, the more back and forth there is negotiating the contract. And at the end of the day, if you spend 30, 60, in some cases 12 months negotiating a contract, that's all that time that's wasted that you're not generating profitable revenue.
Right.
So we always want to make that process as simple as possible because, as I said, you can spend so much time negotiating the contract, but you almost never go back to the contract as long as you're doing what you say you're going to do for that customer.
Right. Yeah. By the way, Shannon McLeod says you're specially gifted. So I just want to make sure I shared that with you.
And she's specially gifted as well.
Love that. All right. Now, when you think back to your early career at Procter & Gamble and Pepsi, what did those environments teach you about leadership that stayed with you, Scott?
I think one of the key things that I learned when I was at P&G is as a leader, you set the example and you set the tone for the organization. And if you do that right and you're a good person, you can build a great organization that is a reflection of you. If you're not being that example, if you're not going out of your way to allow people to see who you are and what's important to you, that's obviously just not going to work out very well. So setting an example, clearly very important. Setting clear guidance and direction, not having people have to guess what it is that they need to do. One of the cornerstones of what I call real-time transformation is Lean Six Sigma and a focus on continuous improvement. And what that means is it's one thing to say you want to deliver better results. It's another thing to talk about delivering better results while being more cost effective. And most people, when they hear we got to do a better job for our clients, but we have to do it more cost effectively, they kind of go on tilt and think, well, how can we do both of those things at the same time? And using a methodology like Lean Six Sigma allows you to do that, to squeeze out the waste and the error, to make sure that the client gets what they want and that we eliminate all those mistakes and errors along the way that cost us so much. Because, when you make a mistake, you pay to make the mistake, you pay to undo the mistake, and you then pay again to do it right. So for the same thing, you're doing it 3 times. So if we can get it right the first time, do it right the first time, everybody's happier. Your client's happier, the team's happier, there's no rework, no credits that need to be issued. All of those different things just go away. Now, when I talk about it like that, it sounds easy, but it's actually challenging work, but so rewarding. And for me, over the course of my career, one of the things that's been most rewarding is how teams can continue year in, year out to continue to find ways to squeeze out that waste and squeeze out that error so that when pricing perhaps gets pressured in the marketplace, you can make that up in your profitability by cutting out that expense and waste that wasn't needed.
You mentioned something really important in leadership about letting them see who you are. And by the way, Shannon McLeod, if you want to drop a comment on this, if I were to visit with people that you worked with in the past, Scott, and said, tell me about who Scott is, not necessarily what you do. Clearly, we know that piece. How would you be described? Or how would you describe yourself?
I think people would say, Scott knows who I am. He knows what I do, and he will do everything and anything he can to help me succeed against the very aggressive objectives that he sets. They'll tell you that they feel my heat, but they also feel my warmth. Because if you don't show that warmth and care about people, they vote with their feet every day. And there's somebody else somewhere that will care about them and will show them that warmth. And that's something that I've always felt that was critically important to make sure that people knew who I was at the same time. Right. I kind of talk about, showing it on your shirt sleeve so that people know who you are. Too many people have this attitude that I don't want people to know who I am. I'm the boss, I'm the manager, I'm the director, the vice president, the CEO, whatever it is. Right. And my business life and my personal life are completely separate. I don't think of it that way. I think of an organization more as a family because generally speaking, we spend more time with our business colleagues than we actually do with our families. Sure. So if they feel that family environment, that usually is going to give you a great result.
And it is important. The empathy and drive. I've never heard it said as heat and warmth, and I like that too because I think it's a great visual to what it is that people need. Right?
I agree.
Yeah. No. So good.
Tanya, one of the things that used to make me crazy when I was younger is when I'd be working for somebody and they'd say, Scott, you've got to work harder. You've got to work smarter. And I would think, oh my God, they think I'm slow and stupid. It's not about working harder or smarter. It's about doing the right things and having processes in place so that people know what to do. Because if they don't know what to do, they kind of go down a decision tree and they get to a decision point and they can go right or they can go left. And if they go right, but the right way to go was left, they keep going down the wrong path. So the more you can have process in place so that people know what it is they're supposed to do instead of guessing about what it is they have to do, the better chances you are of having a positive result.
When you think about your decades in leading, and you assumed a lot of teams, you did a startup, of course, but outside of that, for the most part, you were assuming existing leadership and teams. And you think about the transformation that you were bringing in real time. What kind of stories or who might come to mind from a standpoint that maybe when you went in, I thought this might be tough, but then maybe they turned around to become an absolute rock star?
Oh my goodness gracious. There are so many people that come to mind. I remember one individual that during my initial startup phase, one of the things that I always do is I have a sit down with every manager, every person that's part of the senior leadership team. And the way I define that is the people that report to me directly and the people that report to them. And what I do in a very methodical way is I set up appointments with each one. I spend 45 minutes together with them, and I ask them to come prepared to discuss 6 different questions that I have shared with them in advance. So I have the
Sure.
team together. Here, we're going to have these meetings. Here are the questions. Please come prepared to talk about these specific issues. And I remember one individual that came into my office, sat down, literally grabbed the edge of the table, and I saw her knuckles going white. And I asked, what, you seem a bit uptight, what's going on here? And she says, well, I'm afraid you're going to, and she described something she was afraid I was going to do. And we had a great conversation about why that wouldn't be a good thing, why I wouldn't do that, and tried to set her mind at ease. But she was so uptight about any kind of change. This individual grew into one of the greatest champions of continuous improvement that I've ever met in my entire career. As a matter of fact, in another meeting with this person early on, I was talking about something and about expectations. And she raised her hand and she says, well, my expectation is one morning I'm going to wake up, look at my email, and see a note about we're selling the company. Excuse me, we're selling the company. And I said to her, you'll never have to worry about that, because our mission right now is to build a great company. Could it mean somewhere down the road that we'll sell the company? Yes, it could. But you know what? You'll hear it from me first, out of my mouth, never from an email. And again, this individual blossomed into an absolute true superstar.
Yeah. What happened with the startup?
Well, we had a very successful turnaround and a very successful exit. And this individual, did very well and is still with that company today.
Oh, that's great. I love that. What other anecdotal things are coming to mind? I mean, I know I've got questions to ask in the same hand. I love the stories that you're sharing because I think people can see themselves in them. Right?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because as you know, I've written this book, Leadership for Life, that will be coming out next year. And it really is sort of a conversation with me about these different kind of stories that I experienced in my life that helped me become the individual that I became, and to help me to become the kind of leader who really loves and thrives on making other people successful. I've had a lot of great success in my life, and I want others to have that too. And the objective of the book is to enable people to have those things, to understand what it is that they want to get out of life and how to go get it. And you can't do it alone. One of the things I always talk about is I am fortunate to have an incredible partner in my life, my wife, who literally gave up her career after getting her master's at Northwestern to allow me to have the career that I've had and that we've had together, because it's been about the two of us together and about our family. And on certain things, she takes that leadership role. And one of the important traits of a great leader is to know when to follow. And in those cases, I know to follow her. And in other cases, she follows me. And we have 3 sons, and our sons watched that develop over time, and they all developed into great leaders in their own right. So leadership is not just about business. It can be about being a coach. It can be about being a leader of a charitable organization. It can be about leading a family. But the most important aspect of leadership is to lead yourself. Because if you can't lead yourself, your chances of being successful are greatly diminished. And to be able to lead yourself, you have to be able to have those conversations with yourself about what you're doing that's right, what needs to change, what's the input you're getting back. And listening is, as my mother used to say to me, Scott, the reason God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth is because listening is twice as important as talking. And I always think about that, and that skill of listening and truly listening, not just waiting for the other person to stop talking so that you get your turn, but really listening to what it is that they're saying, really can make a great deal of difference, especially when you think about clients. Clients talk to you because they want something from you. They want a new product, a new service. They want something better. And if they know you're listening, they're going to share more openly because they know they're going to reap the benefit coming back their way.
Sure. When leading yourself, it sounded like you mentioned some check-ins, right? So self-check of what you're doing well, what do you need to improve? How else would you suggest somebody go about leading themselves well? What are some points of wisdom you can give them?
Sure. Well, one thing I always talk about is family comes first. Having a work-life balance when I graduated from college meant you worked to have a life. Today, it means something very, very different. And recognizing that as a leader and leading yourself to make sure that you're doing the right things for your family, but also making sure that you're allowing your team to have that balance of being able to get the work done that needs to be done to be successful, while at the same time not ignoring what should be most important to them. And I'm the first one to admit, I wasn't at every game or event over the course of my lifetime with my kids. I was there most of the time, but I wasn't there all of the time. And that was painful, but they understood what it was that I was doing, because interestingly enough, just as was the case for me growing up, where my father's work was often the conversation at the dinner table, so was the same with our kids, and they learned that way as well. So making sure that everybody understands what the expectation is, making sure that people understand there's going to be rough times, because I had a couple of times where it was a 7-day-a-week job for months because of two specific situations that I accepted to go in and work and fix companies 7 days a week. And that was brutal for me. It was also brutal for my family. It was brutal for the team, but we got through it. I always think about that famous Winston Churchill quote, which is one of my favorite ones. And it's, when you're going through hell, keep going. Because that's the only way to get through it. You got to keep going, get through to the other side, and better days can be ahead. But you've got to know what it is you plan to do and what your plan to get it done.
If a leader finds themselves in a similar season, because even as you said it, what came to mind was 80, 90-hour work weeks, right? 7 days a week. You weren't talking about 9 to 5 either. They were
correct. That is correct.
Intense days. What would your suggestion be to them to be sure they're able to make it through that?
I think you've got to have a vision as to what this looks like at the other end. One of the key attributes of a great leader is the ability to paint that picture so that others can see what it is that you see that we're trying to accomplish. And if they can see it and they understand it, that's half the battle. The rest of the battle is all about transparency, so that making sure that people are not getting surprised, that they know exactly what it is that they should come to expect, because surprises never go well for anybody. Even if you think about it, you ever go to a birthday party, Tanya, for a 2-year-old, and everybody breaks out and sings happy birthday and the kids start screaming and crying?
It's like, what's happening?
Right, exactly. And that's something that stays with us throughout our entire life. And it's very rare as adults that we get surprises that are positive. Most of the time, there's surprises that are negative. So making sure that communication and transparency is there is critically important. But getting people focused on what the main objectives are. And I generally define those objectives as follows. It's about, in a business, it's about growing revenue, growing profitability, driving a high performance culture of alignment. Everybody knows what they need to do. And all of that gets underpinned by total and complete client satisfaction. Because if you can't satisfy clients, your chances of success are very, very slim. So grow revenue, grow profitability, high performance culture of alignment, underpinned by total and complete client satisfaction. If everybody understands those, the decision-making process gets a lot easier as well. Because if it doesn't address those issues, those things, then we got to not do that. And it very easily, you can then decide, nope, don't want to spend this, don't want to spend that. And it makes it easier to prioritize if you're focused on client satisfaction. And one of the things I always remind people of is it's not just about the clients that pay the bills, the people that you sell to, but it's all the internal clients as well. You know, the relationships we have within a company or with suppliers or anybody else that we're dealing with. You know, as a parent, you know, what's the client satisfaction level of your kids? You know, a lot of times I've given presentations and I'll have a husband and wife sitting next to each other, and I'll ask the husband, what's your wife's client satisfaction with you? And, you know, everybody laughs, but usually the wife says, well, you know, it could be better.
Like scale of 1 to 10, or how are we scoring this?
Exactly. So all of these things are important when you're trying to go through those challenges that really are so totally consuming. I had the opportunity to take a company through a bankruptcy based right there in Texas where you are. And when I say I had the opportunity, some people would say, oh my God, that doesn't sound like an opportunity. It was a great opportunity because I had the great opportunity to not only save this company, but save the jobs of thousands of people that worked for that company. That was the single greatest communication challenge of my career, because you had to communicate with your clients, your suppliers, your bankers, and your employees. And all 4 of those communication channels had to line up, because you couldn't say one thing to one group and not have it be true for everybody else. And as a result of clear communications, we went through that bankruptcy in 11 months. And at the time, it was the single largest bankruptcy in the state of Texas. And we came out the other side and had success going forward.
I actually lived through a corporate bankruptcy coming out of the luxury sector. And I think the reason, to what you were just saying, the reason why they made it through was the CEO cared enough to go out into every community and meet with his teams in person to share what was occurring, what was about to unfold. And if you think about other bankruptcy, like business case studies, right, Scott, usually you have a lot of attrition. People, they hear companies filing bankruptcy, it's exit stage left. Based on what you went through, how did you find the retention to be through the process?
So I was very, very open and honest and clear as I was. Before we even entered the bankruptcy, we did a lot of the hard work. And part of the hard work was identifying all the process problems that this company had. I remember my first day on the job. The chairman of the board walked me into a room of the group that was going to be my direct reports. They knew a new leader was coming. They didn't know, really anything about me up until that point. And I went through a presentation talking about my methodology of real-time transformation and the importance of deciding what not to do as a way to save money. And I'll never forget, one of the members of the team stood up out of his chair, leaned across the table. He said, Scott, we have cut every last possible expense out of this business. We've cut through the skin. We've cut through the muscle. We're cutting through bone right now. There is nothing left for us to do. That was the best thing I heard that day, because if that was the mentality, I knew there was a ton to be saved. And then he said the clincher. He said, we have even eliminated the guy who delivers the mail to everybody's office. And I said, well, tell me more about that. Well, we had a guy with a push cart. He delivered mail to everybody in the office. He picked up the outgoing mail, and we eliminated that guy. And I said, well, how did everybody get their mail? Everybody went down to the mailroom and got it themselves. And I said, and this was a headquarters of 4,000 people. I said, 4,000 people at least once a day went down to get their mail? And he said, yep. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. So as a result, we eliminated a lot of positions that, just were wasteful, because every time you eliminate a position, there's a lot of other stuff that goes around it. There could be administrative support, office space, office supplies, all those things. All that expense comes out. And in that case, we took out hundreds of millions of dollars of expense even before we went into the bankruptcy.
Wow.
So for the people that were there, they saw what had happened. They saw that we treated all those people with dignity, respect. They got fair severance. Everybody was taken care of. But the core team that we got down to really understood where we were and why we could be successful going forward because of the way we communicated with each other.
So important. I'm super curious now. How did that one particular person respond when you all were able to cut hundreds of millions?
Unfortunately, we had to free up his future at one point because he just couldn't get his mind wrapped around a different way of doing things. This concept of saving money and improving client satisfaction at the same time, he just didn't want to get it, didn't want to understand. And he actually started undermining some of what we were doing. So unfortunately, we had to sit down and have that conversation. And, hopefully he went someplace else where he thrived, because he wasn't going to thrive with us.
Sure. And that's important too. If somebody's a challenge in an environment, they probably aren't very happy either. I'm not saying he was a challenge, just thinking through when people get so wound up because they're like, I don't want to have to let this person go. In the same hand, if they're not evidently happy at work, they're probably going to be able to have a chance to be happy somewhere else.
And that is absolutely true, because, I want people on the team that want to be there, that people that can see that vision. Perhaps it's a vision that they hadn't seen before. Perhaps it's a recrafting of what the company could become versus what the company was.
Right.
And from a transformational standpoint, those are a lot of fun, because when you can take something and cut it down, get to the core, the essence of what it is, what the real assets of that business are, and then redeploy them in a way that makes it more successful, beautiful things can happen. And I've always talked about the importance of creativity. Sometimes people are afraid to let their creativity come out. And I remember when I had my very first job working for somebody else, because I started a business when I was a kid, but my first job working for somebody else out of college was when I started at Procter & Gamble. And I was on I was in brand management on Dash detergent. And I came up with this idea of putting Dash detergent, a box of it, in every new front-loading washer sold in America. And cut those deals with the manufacturers. We gave them the detergent, they put it in the machines, and our market share exploded, and we became the number one detergent in the low sudsing marketplace.
Wow.
The biggest bit of creativity that I've ever seen happened when I was at Pepsi. When we were in a meeting and the market research team showed up with some research that said people in a blind taste test between Coke and Pepsi choose Pepsi 60% of the time. And from that came the Pepsi Challenge, which in my mind is still today the greatest marketing program of all time, because it took Pepsi from being barely in second place. There were many markets in the country where we were in third place, but overall we were barely in second place. And in a very short period of time, over a couple of years, we became the number one soft drink in what we called the freedom of choice marketplace, where people had a choice. When they went to a supermarket or a convenience store, they could choose Coke or Pepsi. When they went to McDonald's back then, they had a choice between Coke or Coke.
Right.
But in that freedom of choice marketplace, we became number one. We revitalized the brand. And as I said, one of the greatest marketing programs of all time. And it drove Coke to change their formula. Remember New Coke? Oh my God, what a disaster. And my boss at that time, a guy by the name of Roger Enrico, wrote a book called The Other Guy Blinked. And that was all about the story of the Pepsi challenge and how Coke blinked with New Coke and had the disaster, and that helped grow our market share even further. But these creative ideas, these outside the box thinking ideas can really energize an organization and literally change a marketplace.
I'm like, speaking of, do we give them their shout out? I think we give them their shout out, Scott, right? Because you were the first person ever. I'm like, yes.
And you know what? I always talk about branding because I'm a branding guy. This is part of my brand. People know this is what I drink.
Well, cheers to that.
Cheers. Cheers to you.
So you were with Pepsi during the Pepsi Challenge age.
Yes.
Love it. And by the way, I have loved Pepsi since that time too. There is a funny joke I'll share. Somebody said this should call Pepsi okay. You mean? Well, if you go to a restaurant and you ask for order a Coke, they go, well, is Pepsi okay? I'm like, ha ha ha.
Yeah, all too often it's the other way around.
Exactly.
Yes, but even to this day, when I go to a restaurant, no matter how many times I've been there, if I want a Diet Pepsi and I know they only carry Coke, I still ask for a Diet Pepsi.
I love the commitment. Okay, I really took you down some rabbit holes, so thank you for going there with me. You've said each turnaround, startup, or acquisition needed something different. How did you learn to read what an organization actually needed from you? And I think you shared some of this, but that doesn't make each one the same for sure.
No, for sure not. And it really starts in the interview process. So anytime I was about to interview for a new opportunity, I always did a massive amount of research even before I went to my first interview. Mm-hmm. And I used the interview process not only as the opportunity to answer the questions that were being asked of me, but to find out what the answers were to all these different things that I had found through my research. Sure. So before I even walked in the door on day one, I already knew a lot more about the business than many of the people that were working in the business, because, they kind of get tunnel vision and they're not seeing the bigger picture. And one of the big mistakes that organizations make is not paying enough attention to what the competition is doing. Right. So, looking at all that information about what the competition is doing, what their challenges are, and how they've addressed them. And as a result of doing all that research and going through those interview processes, it made it easier for me to decide which jobs to take and which jobs not to take. And one of the things that has always been my habit is I've always kept track of the companies I didn't take the challenges of, the jobs I didn't take. And it's always been fun to see how those companies have fared, what they did. Some of them did okay. Unfortunately, many of those just didn't make it because they didn't understand at the core basis as to what they needed to do, and they didn't have the willingness to do it. Change is really hard. Change is really, really difficult. But as individuals, we're wired to absorb pain. And that starts when we learn to walk. When a baby is getting up and learning to walk, none of us remember this, but, we fell a lot, we scraped our knees, we banged our nose, our forehead. It was painful. Sure. But the prize of walking was so worth it that we worked through it. Well, in business, it's the same way. You got to be willing to absorb that pain, figure it out, and keep moving ahead. So knowing what the company is all about, knowing where the pain is that has to be addressed and getting it addressed quickly is part of the formula that makes this work. So one of the things I always do is I usually know before I get to a company where that low-hanging fruit is, and I start by creating 30-day plans. I never have a 12-month plan or a 6-month plan or even a 90-day plan or a 60-day plan. I've got 30-day plans, and everybody knows what they are. And within those 30 days, people quickly see the wins happening. They see the change. And we get to celebrate those wins every 30 days instead of every year or 6 months or 90 days, whatever it is. And that creates excitement. And as a leader, being able to lead, as a cheerleader sometime to celebrate that success, you also have to balance that with being able to look people in the eye and say, this is not working. We're failing here. We need to address this. Otherwise, we can't be successful. Another part of the approach is I don't wait to get 100% of the information before making a decision. I've always gone with about 80%. Okay. And one of the things that goes along with doing that is you get to move quickly, but you will make mistakes. And what I always tell people is, well, let's make the mistakes as quickly as we can, fix them, and move on. So that we're always operating on our toes instead of operating on our heels. Yeah. One of the devices that I've used very often is when creating a logo, I use a parallelogram. And the reason I use a parallelogram is because it's leaning forward, it's moving ahead, and both of the opposite sides of the parallelogram move in parallel. And getting an organization to think that way, of getting everything running and operating in parallel, is another way to drive home the point of what the things are that we have to do and we have to address, because if we don't, we're not going to be successful. And speed is everything in an organization, and today more so than ever. What used to be acceptable to take 6 months may take 6 hours today. I mean, Tanya, do you remember the days before we had supercomputers in our pocket and we had to rely on sending faxes or mail to people as opposed to today? I mean, when I look at my text messages at the end of a day, I may have had 100 exchanges via text. That didn't exist when I started my career. So everything has gotten faster and faster.
I remember getting my first pager, Scott. Now, I do have to share talk about family first. Your son, Eric, said I was never allowed to have Coke products at home.
It's true.
How dare you? You were closet drinking a Coca-Cola and you weren't telling your dad. Smart job, Eric. That's loyalty. All right.
Well, at least we know Shannon and Eric are watching.
There you go. Let's see. Oh, is Shannon your daughter?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay.
No. Just a good friend and colleague.
Love it. Okay, let's see. So let's talk about real-time transformation. What is it, and how did it become the cornerstone of your leadership approach?
So I kind of started my career when I was 11 years old, and I needed a new bicycle, and I started doing all kinds of research and figured out exactly what bicycle I wanted. And Saturday morning, the whole family was at the kitchen table, and I announced, I've decided what kind of bike that I want to get. And my father asked what it was, and I said, it's a Schwinn Lemon Peeler. I mean, this thing was a Stingray bicycle. It had a gear shift level. It had a drum brake. It had shock absorbers in the seat. I mean, this thing was cool. And my father said, oh my God, that sounds incredible. I said, well, can we go to the bike store today to get it? And he said, yeah, sure. How are you going to pay for it? And I said, what do you mean? And he said these famous words, what do you mean? What do I mean? And he then followed that up with, you're 11 years old. You ought to be able to figure out how to make some money so you can afford the $110 to buy that bicycle. And I remember it was $110 plus tax. And it was getting into the winter, so I decided to start shoveling snow. And I would go to my neighbors and I'd ask them, when it was snowing, you want me to shovel your walk? And they would say yes. They'd pay me $10. I'd go to the next neighbor. And after the first year, I realized that I was spending key delivery time selling. So what I did is I sold in advance. And what I found out is I could do twice as many homes because I didn't have to wait for permission, because I went to people and I said, to my neighbors, last year you spent $10 every time it snowed. It snowed 10 times. You paid me $100. How about if we agree you'll just pay me $100 and I'll take care of your walk in your driveway all winter long. And if it snows more than 10 times, you'll be ahead. If it snows a little less than 10 times, I'll be a little bit ahead, but you'll never have to worry about slipping when you come out the door. And that's how I started this business and how I learned these business practices of what was important to people. That concept of total and complete client satisfaction started back then, because I learned very quickly if I didn't get the snow shoveled properly, someone could get hurt. And I needed to make sure I got it done right. So that's when it started. This framework built around grow revenue, improve profitability, high performance culture of alignment, backed by total and complete client satisfaction, makes that decision-making process easier. It makes delivery that much easier. Everybody knows what it is they have to do, and most importantly, knows what not to do.
Sure.
That, coupled with continuous improvement, with Lean Six Sigma, is what that is all about. And over the years, starting when I was 11, going all the way through my last assignment before I retired my full-time employment, it was always focused on real-time transformation and that building block of continuous improvement. And becoming an evangelist for all of these things. And one of the things that I've enjoyed most in my career is when I see all the other successful people that I've had the opportunity to work with, that seeing them become COOs and CEOs and having the kind of life that like me that I could have never dreamed. I had what I thought were big ambitions when I was a kid, but I was fortunate that I was able to exceed those ambitions, but I never did it alone. I always did it with a team, because anything that's really important in life, I found, is usually pretty complicated, and you can't do it alone. You need the help of others, and that is always been part of that real-time transformation methodology and those 30-day plans.
And the 30-day plans is so smart. Just if the leaders watching don't walk away with any of the other pieces from the jump, make it digestible, right? To get to outcomes.
Right.
Yeah, so important.
Right, exactly. And when people see problems being addressed that were previously ignored, they start to feel like, oh, there could be a new way. Yes. There could be a better tomorrow. And what I did find is the faster I could let people see change, the easier it was to create change. When I got to Language Line, my predecessor had a security system in the building that literally locked the side of the building where his office was. So everybody that was on his side of the building was locked from everybody else. And if somebody from the other side needed to come to that side of the building, somebody had to go and let them in. Day one, I started that morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. By 11 o'clock, I turned off that security system. And people were like, wow, this is amazing. This is really amazing. We don't have to worry about somebody letting us in. So, doing those things that are really visible very quickly. There was a culture there of people walked in and worked whenever they wanted. Some people didn't get to work until 11 o'clock. Now, they may have worked into the night, but they didn't get there until 11. And we had operations in Europe. So, if people got there at 9, it was already lunchtime in Europe and, big chunk of the day. And, setting some structure about when we're going to start work and when work is going to end. All of those things add to that, very visible, easy to see changes that can quickly make a difference in the way an organization thinks and the way an organization acts.
Yeah. And I know we're getting close on time, and there's a couple questions I want to make sure we don't miss, because I just think that they're really going to serve the people watching. At this stage of your life, Scott, how do you define leadership differently than you did earlier in your career?
I think that leadership today is more about showing the way, helping people to maximize their human potential, making it clear of what the mission is, and keeping things open, honest, transparent. I think anybody that knows me would say I never had to guess what Scott was thinking, because they always knew. I never, ever held back on what I was thinking. It wasn't just about delivering results. It was about building that family-like culture that has become very important to me. And, my closest friends are the people that I've worked with over the course of my career.
Yeah, I think Shannon said it really well. She commented earlier, she said, high expectation with lots of love and support to be your best.
I love
Yeah,
that.
spot
I
on.
love that.
Yeah. Now, for the person listening who wants to lead better in their business, family, community, or even themselves, what is one leadership practice they can start living today?
I often tell the story about George and Martha. George and Martha, they've got a couple of kids. They're going to go away on a trip. They get the kids packed up. They load up a cooler with drinks and snacks. They get it in the car. They get the kids strapped in the car. They take the dog for a walk before they put the dog in the car. And they get in the car and they get to the end of the driveway. And George says to Martha, "Where do you want to go?" And Martha says, "I don't know. Where do you want to go?" And George says, "I don't know." So they're all dressed up with no place to go. The best advice I can give to anybody is to know where it is that you want to go. Don't start a journey without knowing that. Because if you don't know where you want to go, chances are you are never, ever going to get there.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that I wrote this book, Leadership for Life, is because I want people to have the benefit of seeing the mistakes I made over the course of my career so they don't have to, but also at the same time to see the things where good decisions were made and good things happened. So it's really something that is not just written for a business person. It can be for a mother, a father, a coach, a religious leader, whoever it is, to have that benefit to understand what it is that they can do to create a better life, not only for themselves, but for everybody else around them.
Yeah. So Abdul Aman has put that you're a visionary leader.
I appreciate the compliment. Thank you very much.
Yeah. With the book coming out, and you've retired your career, right? What's sort of the next vision for you, Scott?
I really want to share all of this. I've had the opportunity to work in a number of companies, and I've had the opportunity to really affect the lives of tens of thousands of people, maybe more. Because what I like to think is the things that I've always talked about, the things that I've always taught, that others have taught them to others as well. Yeah. And I'm hoping, as a result of the book, to be able to bring that to even more people. Because I want people to have the best possible life they possibly can. And most people don't realize just how great that life can be. And it's not just about material things. It's not about homes and cars. It's just about the total quality of life. Your partner in life, your kids, the family, what it's like when you wake up in the morning and you just feel good about what's ahead in the day and what happened yesterday. All of those things are what's important to me now, and that's why I wrote the book, and I hope to do more of that as I can.
And when's the release date planned for?
We don't have a release date, an official release date yet, but it will be early next year.
Okay, and I'm sure as it gets closer, you'll give people an opportunity to possibly pre-order and that sort of thing as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Scott, thank you for being with us. Everyone watching, thank you. Please subscribe, follow. We'll have it on Spotify later, and keep an eye out for Scott's book. Scott, thank you. And everyone, we will see you all next week.
Thank you, Tanya.